The city pulsed with life as the Jefferson family stood at the curb, surrounded by the chaotic hum of honking cars and chatter from passing pedestrians. Maria Jefferson, her purse slung over one shoulder, checked her phone impatiently. It had been a long, exhausting day at a family gathering, and all she wanted now was to get home, kick off her shoes, and relax. Her husband Jamal stood beside her, tossing Tyler's slightly deflated soccer ball between his hands. Their 10-year-old son, Tyler, buzzed with leftover energy, tapping out a rhythm on the sidewalk with his feet. Finally, a sleek black rideshare car rolled up, its glossy surface reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Maria glanced down at her phone to double-check the license plate. "This is us," she said with a relieved sigh. The family piled into the cool interior of the car, grateful to escape the heat of the crowded streets. The driver, a burly man in his 50s with a stern expression, barely looked at them. His name tag on the dashboard read Carl, but his clipped greeting and curt nod didn't leave much room for pleasantries. As the car pulled away from the curb, Maria exchanged a brief look with Jamal, her unease flickering but quickly dismissed. Tyler, oblivious to any tension, was busy telling his parents about his plans for the weekend, his voice animated and bright. As the car weaved through traffic, the Jeffersons fell into their usual rhythm. Maria teased Jamal about his questionable dance moves at the gathering, her laughter mingling with Tyler's high-pitched giggles. Tyler chimed in with exaggerated impressions of his uncles, sending his parents into fits of laughter. For a moment, the car felt filled with the warmth of their little family's joy, a stark contrast to the outside world's bustling chaos. But Carl's sharp gaze in the rearview mirror soon began to dampen the mood. At first, Maria thought it was nothing. Maybe the driver was just having a bad day. Yet as the ride continued, his discomfort became increasingly noticeable. His knuckles tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched, and his eyes flicked to the mirror more frequently, narrowing slightly whenever Jamal or Tyler laughed a little too loudly. Maria's smile faded as she caught Carl muttering something under his breath, his gaze darting back to the road. Jamal noticed, too, his hand quietly finding hers in a reassuring gesture. What had started as a routine ride was beginning to feel charged with an unspoken tension, and Maria couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this trip was far from ordinary. The cityscape blurred past the car windows as the Jefferson family rode in silence, the earlier lighthearted mood dissipating. Carl's eyes darted to the rearview mirror again, his expression hardening with every passing moment. Tyler, still excited from the day's events, began recounting a story about scoring a goal during a family soccer game. His voice, filled with youthful energy, echoed in the car. "Hey, kid, tone it down!" Carl snapped suddenly, his voice sharp and jarring. The words hung in the air, silencing Tyler mid-sentence. Maria turned to her son, giving him a reassuring pat on the knee, then glanced toward the driver. "Sorry about that," Maria said softly, trying to ease the tension. "He's just a little excited." Carl grunted in response, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. The atmosphere in the car grew heavier, the Jeffersons exchanging uneasy glances. A few minutes later, Carl muttered something under his breath as he looked at Jamal through the mirror. "Would be nice if people knew how to clean their shoes before getting into someone else's car," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. Jamal's eyes narrowed, but he kept his voice calm. "We're not tracking any dirt. Your car's fine." Carl's only response was a low, bitter chuckle as he turned his gaze back to the road. Maria leaned closer to Jamal, whispering, "Let's just get home." "It's not worth it." But the situation escalated quickly. As the car approached a quiet, dimly lit intersection, Carl slammed on the brakes. The sudden jolt threw them forward, and Tyler let out a startled yelp. The Jeffersons barely had time to react before Carl twisted in his seat, his glare icy and filled with disdain. "I don't drive people like you," he spat, his voice low but cutting. "Get out of my car." For a moment, silence filled the car. The words hung in the air like a slap, leaving the Jeffersons stunned. Maria blinked, her mind racing to process what she'd just heard. Jamal's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides, though he remained seated. "What do you mean by that?" Jamal asked, his voice steady but edged with barely restrained anger. Carl sneered. "You know exactly what I mean. Now I said get out." Maria, trying to shield Tyler from the growing tension, placed a protective arm around him. "Look, we don't want any trouble," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Just take us home, and we'll be out of your way." But Carl's demeanor grew more aggressive. He raised his voice, barking, "I said get out of my car, now!" Tyler's eyes filled with tears, his small body trembling as he clung to his mother. The sight of his son's fear pushed Jamal to act. Taking a deep breath to control his anger, he opened the door and stepped out of the car, his every movement deliberate. Turning back, he gestured for Maria and Tyler to follow. Maria quickly helped Tyler out of the car, her heart pounding as she tried to comfort him. The three of them stood on the sidewalk, the night air cool against their skin, as Carl slammed the door shut and sped off without another word. His taillights disappeared into the distance, leaving them alone in an unfamiliar part of the city. Jamal looked down at Tyler, brushing a tear from his cheek. "It's okay, buddy," he said softly, though his clenched fists betrayed his inner turmoil. Maria pulled Tyler close, her mind racing as she scanned the quiet, empty streets. "We'll figure this out," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "We'll get home." The Jeffersons stood together under the glow of a solitary street lamp, shaken but united, as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Their journey home had taken a cruel and unexpected turn, but they were determined not to let this moment define them. Jamal's footsteps hit the pavement harder than usual as he, Maria, and Tyler walked toward the nearest bus stop. His fists were still clenched, and his jaw tightened with every step. The humiliation, the sheer audacity of Carl's words, echoed in his mind, fueling his anger. Beside him, Maria held Tyler's hand, her motherly instincts taking over as she tried to soothe their son. Though her face was calm, her eyes betrayed a fire that was growing inside her. When they reached the bus stop, Maria glanced at her phone. The rideshare app was still open, the trip showing as canceled. She stared at the screen, her brows furrowing as an idea began to form. "Jamal," she said quietly, nudging him out of his thoughts. "If he's still out there driving, we can't just let this go." Jamal turned to her, his expression questioning but slowly softening. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if we don't report this, he could do this to someone else. And who knows how far he'd take it next time." Maria's voice was steady, but her determination was clear. Tyler, still sniffling, clung to her arm. "He was mean, Mom. I don't want anyone else to feel like that," he said softly, his words only strengthening Maria's resolve. By the time they got home, the plan was already forming in Maria's mind. After putting Tyler to bed, she sat at the dining table with her phone, pulling up the rideshare app's support section. Jamal joined her, his laptop open and ready. Together, they began piecing together the evidence. Maria started with the basics: the timestamp of the ride, the canceled trip notification, and the exact location where Carl had left them stranded. She detailed everything in the app's report section, recounting the driver's hostility and how he had abruptly forced them out of the car. Each word she typed carried the weight of her anger and a fierce determination to see this through. Jamal, meanwhile, dug deeper. As a software engineer, he was no stranger to online research. He searched public forums, local news archives, and complaints logged against rideshare companies. It wasn't long before he found Carl's name in a few troubling entries. Passengers, most of them from minority backgrounds, had filed complaints against him for discriminatory behavior, rude comments, and abrupt cancellations. Jamal's heart sank as he realized this wasn't an isolated incident. Carl had a pattern. "This guy shouldn't even be on the road," Jamal muttered, his frustration renewed. He copied the links and screenshots of the complaints, adding them to the growing file they were compiling. Maria, finishing her report to the rideshare company, leaned over to look at Jamal's screen. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a particularly disturbing review. A young woman described how Carl had yelled at her for bringing a stroller and left her stranded late at night. "He's been doing this for a while, Maria." She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Then it's time we make sure he's held accountable." The next step was reaching out to the rideshare company directly. Maria composed a detailed email, attaching screenshots of their trip history, timestamps, and even a photo of Tyler's tear-streaked face taken in the aftermath of the incident. She ended the message with a firm demand, an immediate investigation into Carl's behavior, and assurances that no other family would experience what they had. Jamal didn't stop there. He contacted a local advocacy group that dealt with cases of racial discrimination. With their help, he learned about additional avenues to escalate their complaint, including filing a report with the city's transportation authority. The group encouraged them to share their story publicly, offering to connect them with local media if they chose to speak out. For a moment, Jamal hesitated. The idea of exposing their family to public scrutiny felt daunting. But when he looked at Tyler, who was now peacefully asleep upstairs, he knew they couldn't let fear hold them back. "We're doing this for him," he said quietly, glancing at Maria, "and for everyone else who's dealt with people like Carl." Maria reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "We're in this together." Over the next few days, their story began to take shape. The rideshare company responded to Maria's report, promising to investigate. Meanwhile, Jamal's research unearthed even more troubling details about Carl's driving history. Armed with evidence, they felt empowered. What had started as a humiliating and painful experience was now a mission, not just to seek justice, but to ensure no one else would face what they had. For the first time since that fateful ride, the Jeffersons felt a glimmer of hope. Their voices would be heard, and they wouldn't stop until they made a difference. Maria sat at the dining table with her phone, the memory of that night still vivid in her mind. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, but her resolve was steady. She knew their story had to be told, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had experienced something similar. With Jamal and Tyler beside her for support, she began crafting a heartfelt post for social media. In the post, Maria recounted their experience in vivid detail. She described Carl's hostility, the cruel words he had spoken, and the fear and humiliation they had felt as they were left stranded in the middle of nowhere. She attached screenshots of their canceled ride, the complaint she'd filed with the rideshare company, and links to the other passenger reviews Jamal had uncovered. Her words were raw and honest, ending with a call to action. No one should have to face discrimination or hostility while trying to get home. This needs to stop. Jamal added his own touch, ensuring the post was clear and factual. Once they hit publish, the story began to spread like wildfire. Within hours, Maria's post was shared thousands of times, with strangers offering their support and tagging the rideshare company in droves. Comments poured in from people who had faced similar experiences, their voices joining the Jeffersons in a collective demand for justice. The local news soon picked up the story. Reporters reached out to Maria for interviews, and she and Jamal decided to speak out publicly. Sitting in front of cameras, they shared not just the details of their ordeal, but also their hopes for change. "This isn't just about one bad driver," Maria said, her voice steady. "It's about creating a system where people feel safe and respected, no matter who they are." The mounting public pressure forced the rideshare company to act swiftly. Within days, they announced that Carl had been suspended pending an internal investigation. A week later, his contract was officially terminated. The company issued a public apology to the Jefferson family and pledged to review its driver screening and anti-discrimination policies. But for the Jeffersons, this wasn't enough. They teamed up with a local advocacy group to push for broader changes within the industry. Together, they organized community forums where riders could share their experiences and propose solutions. They also worked with legal experts to draft recommendations for stronger anti-discrimination policies, which they presented to the rideshare company's leadership. Maria's post had started a movement. What began as a single family's fight for justice became a rallying cry for change, uniting people from all walks of life. As news outlets continued to cover the story, the Jeffersons saw firsthand the impact of their actions. The rideshare company committed to implementing new training programs for drivers and creating a dedicated team to handle discrimination complaints. One evening, as the Jeffersons sat together in their living room, Tyler looked up at his parents with a proud smile. "We did something good, didn't we?" he asked. Maria hugged him tightly. "Yes, we did. And it's just the beginning." A month after their ordeal, the Jefferson family found themselves standing backstage at a community event promoting racial equality in public services. The room buzzed with energy, filled with activists, local leaders, and families eager to make a difference. Maria adjusted Tyler's tie, smiling at her son's growing confidence. What had started as a painful experience had transformed into a mission for justice and progress. When their turn came, the applause was deafening as Maria stepped up to the podium. She took a deep breath, her gaze scanning the audience. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady. "I'm here tonight to share a story, not just about what happened to my family, but about how we chose to respond." Maria recounted their experience with raw honesty, describing the humiliation they had felt and the fear in Tyler's eyes as they were forced out of Carl's car. She spoke of the sleepless nights and the anger that had threatened to consume them, but also of the resolve they had found as a family. "We could have stayed silent," she said. "We could have let this incident fade into memory, but we knew silence wouldn't protect the next person who faced this kind of discrimination." The crowd nodded in agreement, their attention riveted as Maria continued. She shared how their social media post had gone viral, how strangers had rallied around them, and how the collective pressure had forced the rideshare company to take action. "This isn't just about us," she said, her voice rising with conviction. "It's about building a world where everyone feels safe, valued, and respected." When it was Tyler's turn to speak, the room quieted in anticipation. The shy boy who had once hidden behind his mother's arm now stood tall, gripping the microphone with steady hands. "That night, I was scared," he admitted, his voice small but determined. "But my mom and dad showed me that we don't fight hate with hate, we fight it with courage and love." The crowd erupted in applause, and Tyler beamed with pride. Jamal stepped forward to share his perspective, emphasizing the power of technology and community in holding people accountable. Together, the Jeffersons painted a picture of hope and resilience, showing how even the darkest moments could be a catalyst for change. Meanwhile, Carl's life had taken a different trajectory. After losing his job, he faced legal consequences as other victims came forward, sharing their own experiences of his discriminatory behavior. His actions, once hidden, were now exposed to the world, and he was held accountable for the harm he had caused. For the Jefferson family, the incident became a symbol of their strength and unity. They had turned their pain into purpose, standing together to create lasting change. As the event concluded, they stood hand in hand, the audience rising to their feet in a standing ovation. The Jeffersons had proven that even the smallest voices, when united, could make a powerful impact.